I remember the exact moment everything fell apart. It was a Thursday afternoon when Dad came home early from his job as Chief Financial Officer at Westridge Industries. His face was pale, his tie loosened, and his hands shook as he set his briefcase down by the door. Mom rushed over from the kitchen, and I paused my homework at the dining table, sensing something terrible had happened. "They let me go," Dad whispered, his voice breaking. "The board called an emergency meeting. They said there were financial irregularities in the quarterly reports. They're accusing me of embezzlement." My mother gasped, covering her mouth. I was 17 years old enough to understand what embezzlement meant and what it could do to our family. Dad had worked at Westridge for 15 years, climbing from junior accountant to CFO through hard work and integrity. He was the most honest person I knew, always lecturing me about doing the right thing even when it was difficult. "But you didn't do anything wrong, right?" I asked, my voice small and scared. Dad looked at me with exhausted eyes. "Of course not, son. I would never steal from the company. But someone manipulated the numbers, made it look like I approved unauthorized transfers. The evidence points to me, and the board wants to avoid a scandal. They gave me two choices: resign quietly or face a public investigation." Mom sank into a chair. "What did you choose?" "I resigned," Dad said heavily. "I signed a document agreeing not to pursue legal action in exchange for 6 months' severance. Our lawyer said fighting it could take years and cost more than we have. The company has resources I can't match." That night, I heard my parents talking in their bedroom. Mom was crying, worried about our mortgage, my college fund, and how we'd survive. Dad kept reassuring her that he'd find another job, that everything would be okay. But I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. The news spread through our family quickly. My uncle, Dad's older brother, heard about it within days. Uncle Preston was everything Dad wasn't: loud, wealthy, and obsessed with status. He owned a successful car dealership chain and never let anyone forget it. He'd always looked down on Dad's corporate job, calling it working for someone else like a servant. When Uncle Preston called that Sunday, I answered the phone. "Put your father on," he demanded without greeting me. I handed the phone to Dad, who took it reluctantly. I stayed close enough to hear both sides of the conversation. "So it's true then?" Uncle Preston's voice boomed through the speaker. "You got yourself fired for stealing?" "I didn't steal anything," Dad said firmly. "There were accounting irregularities that I'm being blamed for, but I'm innocent." Uncle Preston laughed, a cruel sound that made my stomach turn. "Innocent? Brother, they don't fire CFOs for being innocent. You got caught with your hand in the cookie jar, didn't you?" Dad's jaw tightened. "Preston, I'm telling you the truth. I would never compromise my integrity like that." "Integrity?" Uncle Preston scoffed. "That's rich coming from someone who just lost his job in disgrace. I always knew your corporate ladder climbing would end badly. You should have gone into business for yourself like I did, instead of being someone's employee." The words stung because Uncle Preston had been saying similar things for years. Every family gathering turned into a competition, with Uncle Preston bragging about his success while subtly putting Dad down. "I need to go," Dad said quietly. "The family needs to know what kind of man you really are," Uncle Preston continued. "A thief and a liar. I won't have my name associated with this scandal." He hung up before Dad could respond. My father stood there holding the phone, looking more defeated than I'd ever seen him. That conversation was just the beginning of Uncle Preston's campaign to humiliate our family. The following week, we had a family reunion planned at Grandma's house. Mom suggested we skip it, but Dad refused. "I won't hide like I've done something wrong," he said. "I'm innocent and I'll face everyone with my head held high." I admired his courage, even though I dreaded what was coming. The reunion was exactly as terrible as I'd feared. Uncle Preston arrived in his newest luxury car, making sure everyone saw it. He brought expensive wine and gifts for Grandma, playing the role of successful son while casting pointed looks at Dad. During dinner, Uncle Preston made his move. "So, brother," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "found a new job yet?" "Oh wait, who would hire someone fired for financial crimes?" The table went silent. My cousins stared at their plates. Grandma looked confused, not fully understanding what was happening. Aunt Claire, Uncle Preston's wife, smiled thinly. Dad set down his fork carefully. I resigned to protect the company's reputation while they investigate. I didn't commit any crimes. That's not what I heard, Uncle Preston said, taking a large sip of wine. I heard the board had solid evidence of embezzlement. Multiple unauthorized transfers totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars, all approved with your credentials. Someone used my credentials fraudulently, Dad explained patiently. I'm working with a private investigator to prove it. Uncle Preston burst out laughing. A private investigator? With what money? You can barely afford this potluck dinner, let alone a PI. Mom's face flushed with anger, but Dad placed a calming hand on hers. We're managing fine, he said. And the truth will come out eventually. The truth? Uncle Preston leaned back in his chair. The truth is you were always too proud, too convinced of your own righteousness. And now it's caught up with you. You probably did take that money and just can't admit it, even to yourself. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Dad didn't steal anything, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. He's the most honest person I know. Uncle Preston turned his condescending gaze on me. Kid, you don't understand the real world yet. People aren't always who you think they are. Your dad made mistakes, and now he's paying for them. The only mistake I made was trusting the wrong people at work, Dad said, standing up. Come on, everyone. We're leaving. As we gathered our things, Uncle Preston called after us. Run away if you want. But you can't run from the truth. The whole family knows what you are now, a failure and a thief. I looked back and saw Grandma crying, confused by the conflict between her sons. My younger cousins looked scared. Aunt Claire was whispering to other relatives, probably spreading more rumors. The drive home was silent except for Mom's quiet tears. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't let Uncle Preston destroy Dad's reputation. I had to do something, even if I didn't know what yet. Dad had mentioned a private investigator, but I'd overheard him tell Mom they couldn't afford one. So I decided to investigate myself. I was good with computers, having learned coding and programming through online courses. I knew Dad kept work files on his home computer, backed up from his office before they'd locked him out of the system. The next day, while Dad was out job hunting and Mom was at her part-time job, I accessed his computer. I felt guilty going through his files without permission, but I was desperate to help. I found folders full of financial reports, emails, and spreadsheets. I didn't understand all the technical accounting terms, but I started learning. I spent hours researching financial documentation, teaching myself to read balance sheets and transaction logs. Slowly, patterns began to emerge. The suspicious transfers had all occurred on specific dates over an 8-month period. Each one was approved with Dad's credentials, but something seemed off. The timing was strange. Many approvals came through at odd hours, times when I knew Dad wasn't even at the office. I created a timeline, marking when each fraudulent transaction occurred and cross-referencing it with Dad's calendar, which he'd also backed up. On at least 6 occasions, the transfers were approved while Dad was verified to be somewhere else, at conferences, client meetings, even on vacation. This was evidence that someone else had used his login credentials. But who? I dug deeper into the email communications. Dad had been meticulous about his correspondence, saving everything. I searched for mentions of the accounts where money had been transferred. Most were legitimate vendor accounts, but 3 were unfamiliar. I Googled the company names and found they were shell corporations with no real business presence. Someone at Westbridge had created fake vendors and funneled money to them using Dad's credentials. Now I needed to figure out who. I made a list of people who would have had access to Dad's login information. His assistant, the IT department, other executives. Then I noticed something in the email metadata that made my heart race. Several of the approval emails had been sent from an IP address different from Dad's usual office computer. I used an online tool to trace the IP address and found it belonged to a computer in the office of the Vice President of Finance, a man named Howard Pierce. Dad had mentioned Howard before. They'd worked together for years. Howard had been friendly, supportive, always ready to help. He'd even sent a sympathy card after Dad was fired. But why would Howard's computer show up in these suspicious emails? Unless Howard was the one who'd been using Dad's credentials to approve fraudulent transfers. I needed more proof. I couldn't go to Dad with just this suspicion. He'd been through enough without false hope. I spent the next week digging through more files, finding more connections. Howard had been the one who'd discovered the irregularities and reported them to the board. Howard had been conveniently promoted to acting CFO after Dad's departure. The pieces were falling into place, but I still needed something concrete. Then I found it, an encrypted file buried deep in Dad's backup. It took me 2 days to crack the password using various combinations of company terms and dates. Inside was Dad's personal journal, where he'd documented everything that had seemed suspicious at work. 3 months before his firing, Dad had noted that Howard had been asking unusual questions about his login credentials, claiming he needed them for an audit. Dad had refused, following company policy. 2 months before his firing, Dad had discovered a discrepancy in one of Howard's reports but had been talked out of investigating it further. Howard had explained it away as a clerical error. Dad had even written, "Something feels wrong about Howard's explanation, but I have no proof. Need to watch more carefully." But before Dad could watch more carefully, he'd been fired. Howard had moved quickly, framed Dad perfectly, and taken his position. I now had enough evidence to at least raise serious questions. I showed everything to Dad that evening. He listened quietly as I explained what I'd found, his expression moving from surprise to hope to cautious optimism. "Son, this is incredible work," he said, looking through my documentation. "But we need to be careful. Howard is powerful now, and the company won't want to admit they fired the wrong person. We need a real lawyer," Mom said, looking at my research. "Someone who can present this properly." Dad shook his head. "We can't afford the kind of lawyer we'd need to take on Westbridge." "What if we didn't have to afford it?" I suggested. "What if we went to the media instead? This is a story about corporate fraud and an innocent man being framed. Journalists love stories like this." My parents exchanged glances. "That's risky," Dad said. "If we go public and can't prove everything completely, it could make things worse." But I could see him considering it. We spent the weekend strategizing. I compiled everything into a clear, organized presentation. Dad wrote a detailed statement explaining his side. Mom researched journalists who'd covered corporate fraud cases before. On Monday, we sent our package to 3 different journalists at major news outlets. We waited anxiously for responses. 2 days later, a reporter named Vanessa Hughes called. She worked for a respected business news website and was very interested in our story. "I'll need to verify everything independently," she explained. "But if what you're showing me is accurate, this is significant. A man wrongly accused, a corporate cover-up, fraud at a major company. Readers will care about this." She spent 2 weeks investigating. She interviewed Dad extensively, reviewed all my evidence, and even managed to speak with some of Dad's former colleagues off the record. One of them, a woman named Patricia from accounting, admitted she'd always thought it was strange that Dad would suddenly start stealing after 15 years of impeccable service. Vanessa also discovered that Howard Pierce had purchased an expensive new house 6 months ago, well beyond what his VP salary should have allowed. When questioned about it, Howard claimed it was an inheritance, but Vanessa couldn't verify any deceased relatives. While Vanessa worked on her investigation, our family situation grew worse. Dad couldn't find work because word had spread in the industry about his firing. We burned through his severance pay quickly. Mom took extra shifts at her job. I got a part-time job after school to help with expenses. And Uncle Preston continued his campaign of humiliation. He showed up at Grandma's house whenever he knew we'd be there, making snide comments about Dad being unemployed. At a cousin's birthday party, he loudly offered to loan Dad money, since you clearly need it after your little stealing problem. Dad always refused to engage, which seemed to frustrate Uncle Preston even more. At Sunday dinner, Uncle Preston brought it up again. "I'm just trying to help family," he said with fake concern. "Even though you brought shame on our name, you're still my brother. I can give you a job washing cars at one of my dealerships. It's honest work, better than stealing." "I don't need your charity, Preston," Dad said quietly. And I didn't steal anything. Still claiming innocence? Uncle Preston shook his head. It's been 3 months, brother. If you were really innocent, wouldn't something have happened by now? Wouldn't someone have cleared your name? The words stung because part of me wondered the same thing. What if Vanessa's investigation didn't pan out? What if we couldn't prove Dad's innocence? But I pushed those doubts away. I'd seen the evidence. I knew the truth. 2 weeks later, Vanessa called with news. My article is running tomorrow morning, she said. I've verified enough of your evidence to raise serious questions about Howard Pierce's role in this. I also got a statement from Westbridge. They claim they're reviewing the matter, which is corporate speak for, we're worried. That night I barely slept. The article could change everything, or it could make things worse. When it published the next morning, the response was immediate and overwhelming. The headline read, "Innocent until proven guilty? CFO claims he was framed in corporate embezzlement scheme." Vanessa had done an amazing job. She laid out all the evidence clearly, showed the timeline discrepancies, highlighted Howard's suspicious behavior, and presented Dad as a victim of corporate injustice. Within hours, the article had thousands of shares. People commented with their own stories of being wrongly accused at work. Business ethics professors used it as a teaching example. Other journalists picked up the story, asking for interviews. By noon, Westbridge Industries' stock price had dropped 3%. By evening, the company issued a formal statement saying they were launching an internal investigation into the allegations. Dad's phone rang constantly, former colleagues expressing support, lawyers offering to take his case on contingency, even job recruiters saying companies were impressed by how he'd handled the situation. But the most important call came 3 days later. It was from the chairman of Westbridge's board, a man named Frederick Blackwell. "Mr. Harrison," Frederick said formally, "I'm calling to inform you that our internal investigation has uncovered significant irregularities in Mr. Pierce's handling of financial matters. We've also discovered evidence that supports your claim of being framed." Dad's hand shook as he held the phone. "What kind of evidence?" "IT forensics found that your credentials were accessed remotely from Mr. Pierce's computer on multiple occasions. We also found encrypted files on his work computer containing instructions for creating shell corporations. And his bank records, which we subpoenaed, show deposits that align with the timing of the fraudulent transfers." Frederick paused. "Mr. Harrison, Westbridge Industries owes you an apology. We acted hastily based on false evidence, and we wronged you. We'd like to discuss making this right." Over the next week, Dad met with the company's lawyers multiple times. Howard Pierce had been arrested and charged with embezzlement, fraud, and a host of other crimes. The evidence against him was overwhelming once investigators knew where to look. Westbridge offered Dad a settlement that included full restoration of his reputation, back pay for the months he'd been unemployed, a generous compensation package for the damage to his career, and his choice of returning as CFO or taking a different executive position. Dad chose to return. He wanted to walk back into that building with his head held high, to show everyone that truth and integrity mattered. The day Dad returned to work, the entire finance department gave him a standing ovation. Patricia from accounting had tears in her eyes. Even people who'd avoided him after his firing came to apologize. But the best moment was still to come. We held a family dinner to celebrate Dad's vindication. Uncle Preston showed up, probably expecting to make more cruel comments. Instead, he walked into a room full of relatives congratulating Dad, talking about the news articles, and praising his courage. Grandma hugged Dad tightly, apologizing for ever doubting him. "I never doubted you, son," she said. "I just didn't understand what was happening. I'm so proud of you." Uncle Preston stood awkwardly by the door, for once not knowing what to say. Dad approached him calmly. "Hello, Preston." "So you were telling the truth," Uncle Preston said, unable to meet Dad's eyes. "Yes, I was," Dad replied. "Just like I told you from the beginning." "Well, that's good. Good that it worked out," Uncle Preston mumbled. "Is it?" Dad asked. "Because for months, you humiliated me in front of our family. You called me a thief and a liar. You mocked me when I was at my lowest point. You offered me a job washing cars to degrade me further." The room had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. Uncle Preston's face reddened. The evidence looked bad. Anyone would have thought. Anyone with no faith in their family might have thought that, Dad interrupted. But you're my brother, Preston. You've known me your whole life. You know I'm honest. Yet you chose to believe the worst about me. Uncle Preston struggled for words. I'm sorry. I should have supported you. Yes, you should have, Dad said firmly. Do you know what kept me going through the worst of this? My wife, who never doubted me. My son, who investigated tirelessly to prove my innocence. My friends and colleagues who believed in my character. You weren't among them, Preston. Uncle Preston looked genuinely ashamed for the first time I could remember. How can I make it up to you? Dad considered this. You can start by examining why you were so quick to tear me down. Was it really about the allegations, or was it about something else? Some need to feel superior. The question hung in the air. I realized Dad was right. Uncle Preston had always competed with him, always needed to be the successful one, the important one. Dad's crisis had been an opportunity for Uncle Preston to feel better about himself. I think I was jealous, Uncle Preston finally admitted, his voice quiet. You had something I never did. Integrity, respect, a family that genuinely loved you. My success is all money and status, but it's empty. The confession surprised everyone, especially Aunt Claire, who looked at her husband with new eyes. Dad put a hand on Uncle Preston's shoulder. It's not too late to be a better person, Preston. But you have to want it. That dinner marked a turning point in our family dynamics. Uncle Preston became quieter, less boastful. He started asking Dad for advice on things beyond business. He even apologized to Mom and me separately. As for me, I learned valuable lessons from the whole experience. I learned that staying true to your values matters even when everyone doubts you. I learned that family should support each other through difficult times, not exploit weakness. And I learned that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the strongest. 6 months later, Dad was thriving at Westbridge. The new board had implemented better security measures to prevent fraud. Howard Pierce was convicted and sentenced to 8 years in prison. The money he'd stolen was recovered and returned to the company. Several companies had tried to recruit Dad away from Westbridge, impressed by how he'd handled the crisis. But he chose to stay, feeling he had unfinished business, proving that the finance department could operate with complete integrity. He implemented new transparency measures and whistleblower protections so no one else could be framed the way he was. My own life changed too. The investigation skills I'd developed led me to pursue computer science and cybersecurity in college. Several universities offered scholarships after hearing about how I'd helped prove Dad's innocence. Vanessa's article about our family won a journalism award for investigative reporting. She stayed in touch, occasionally updating us on corporate fraud cases she covered. She said our story had inspired her to look deeper into allegations, to question official narratives, and to give voice to people claiming injustice. 1 year after Dad's return to work, Westbridge held their annual company celebration. During his speech, the CEO publicly acknowledged the mistake they'd made and praised Dad's grace in returning to lead the finance department. Harrison showed us what true character looks like, the CEO said. When wrongly accused, he didn't become bitter or vengeful. He simply worked to uncover the truth. And then came back to make this company better. That's the kind of leader we need. The applause was thunderous. I attended with Mom, both of us beaming with pride. After the ceremony, many people approached Dad to shake his hand or share how his story had impacted them. One young employee told him she'd almost quit after being blamed for someone else's mistake, but Dad's story had given her courage to fight back and clear her name. Another said he'd been inspired to report fraud he'd witnessed, no longer afraid of speaking up. Dad's vindication had rippled outward, encouraging others to stand up for truth. That evening we had a quiet family dinner at home, just Mom, Dad, and me. I need to thank you properly, Dad said to me over dessert. What you did, investigating on your own, finding evidence that even professional investigators missed, you saved more than my career. You saved our family. I just couldn't stand by and watch Uncle Preston humiliate you when I knew you were innocent. I said. You taught me to fight for what's right. Dad smiled, his eyes misty. Sometimes the student becomes the teacher. You showed me that even when the world seems against you, if you know the truth, you have to keep fighting. Mom raised her glass. To truth, to family, and to never giving up. We clinked glasses, a simple moment that meant everything. The doorbell rang, interrupting our celebration. I answered it to find Uncle Preston standing there, looking uncomfortable. Is your father home? He asked. I brought something for him. I led him to the dining room. Uncle Preston held out a framed photograph. It was from our childhood, showing Dad and him as young boys, arms around each other's shoulders, both smiling. I found this in Mom's attic, Uncle Preston said. It reminded me of who we used to be before I let money and ego ruin our relationship. I wanted you to have it. Dad took the photograph, studying it carefully. I remember this day. We just built a treehouse together. You were the big brother I looked up to. And somewhere along the way, I forgot what it meant to be a brother, Uncle Preston said quietly. I'm sorry, truly sorry, for everything. For not believing you. For humiliating you. For being so caught up in competition that I lost sight of family. Dad stood and hugged Uncle Preston. I forgive you. We can't change the past, but we can choose how we move forward. As Uncle Preston left that night, I saw something different in him. Genuine humility, maybe for the first time in his life. Our ordeal had changed everyone it touched. Dad had proved that integrity matters more than reputation, that truth eventually surfaces, and that staying true to yourself through the darkest times builds character that nothing can shake. And me? I learned that sometimes the greatest thing you can do for someone you love is believe in them when everyone else has stopped, and fight for them when they're too exhausted to fight for themselves. That's what family really means. 2 years after Dad's vindication, our lives had settled into a peaceful rhythm that felt almost surreal compared to the chaos we'd endured. Dad had been promoted to Executive Vice President of Operations at Westbridge, overseeing not just finance but multiple departments. His salary had tripled, and we'd moved into a beautiful house in a neighborhood we'd only dreamed about before. But the best change wasn't financial, it was the respect Dad commanded everywhere he went. Industry conferences invited him as a keynote speaker. Business schools asked him to guest lecture about ethics and crisis management. His story had become a case study in several MBA programs about corporate integrity and wrongful termination. I was now in my second year of college, studying computer science with a focus on cybersecurity and digital forensics. The skills I'd taught myself while investigating Dad's case had blossomed into a genuine passion. I'd even secured an internship at a firm that specialized in uncovering corporate fraud, working on cases similar to what happened to Dad. Uncle Preston had undergone the most dramatic transformation. He'd sold one of his car dealerships and donated a significant portion of the proceeds to a foundation supporting people wrongly accused of crimes. He'd also started attending family therapy with Aunt Claire, working on the insecurity and competitiveness that had poisoned his relationships for so long. At a recent family gathering, Uncle Preston pulled me aside. Your father told me you helped establish that foundation I donated to, he said. That you connected us with organizations that help people fight false accusations. I nodded. It seemed like a good cause, especially after what Dad went through. You're a remarkable young man, Uncle Preston said, and for once there was no condescension in his voice, just genuine admiration. I spent years trying to prove I was better than your father, and all I proved was that I was smaller. Meanwhile, you were just trying to help your family, and you ended up changing lives. His words touched me more than I expected. People can change, Uncle Preston. You're proof of that. That summer, something unexpected happened. Howard Pierce, the man who'd framed Dad, requested a meeting from prison. His lawyer contacted Dad's lawyer with the request, saying Howard wanted to apologize in person. Dad was hesitant. I've moved on, he told Mom and me over dinner. I'm not sure what good it would do to see him. Maybe it's not about what good it does you, Mom suggested gently. Maybe he needs it for his own redemption. After several days of consideration, Dad agreed. I asked if I could come along and surprisingly, Dad said yes. You were part of bringing the truth to light, he explained. You have as much right to closure as I do. The prison was a stark, depressing place. We went through multiple security checkpoints before being led to a small visiting room. Howard Pierce looked nothing like the confident executive I remembered from old company photos Dad had shown me. He was thinner, grayer, and his eyes held a deep sadness. "Thank you for coming," Howard said quietly as we sat down across from him. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," Dad replied honestly. "Why did you ask to see me?" Howard took a deep breath. "Because I need you to hear the truth directly from me, not filtered through lawyers or news reports. What I did to you was unforgivable. I stole money, yes, but worse than that, I destroyed your reputation and nearly ruined your life." He paused, struggling with emotion. "I was drowning in gambling debts. I'd made terrible investments, borrowed from dangerous people, and I needed money fast. When the opportunity presented itself to access funds through the company, I took it. And when I needed a scapegoat, I chose you because you were successful, respected, and I knew people would believe it." The confession was painful to hear, even though we'd known the basic facts. But hearing the personal motivation, the calculated betrayal, made it more real. "What hurt most wasn't losing my job," Dad said. "It was that you were my friend. Or at least I thought you were. We worked together for years, Howard. I trusted you." "I know," Howard said, tears streaming down his face. "And that trust made you an easy target. I knew your login patterns, your schedules, your habits. I exploited everything you'd shared with me in friendship. There's no excuse for what I did. I spoke up for the first time. Did you know my dad has a son? That your actions affected a whole family, not just him." Howard looked at me, seeming to notice me for the first time. "You must be the one who uncovered the evidence. The investigator." "I'm his son," I said firmly. "And I watched my father suffer while you got promoted into his job. I watched our family struggle while you bought a new house with stolen money. I watched my uncle humiliate him at family dinners because of lies you created." Howard closed his eyes. "I thought about that a lot in here. About all the people I hurt beyond just the company. Your family, the other employees who doubted themselves after I was caught, the investors who lost money. The ripple effects of my choices haunt me every day." "So why tell us this now?" Dad asked. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," Howard said immediately. "I want nothing from you. I'm serving 8 years, and I deserve every day of it. I asked to see you because my therapist said I need to take accountability, to face the people I've harmed and acknowledge what I did without excuses." He looked directly at Dad. "You didn't deserve what I did to you. You were a good boss, a good colleague, and a good man. I destroyed that because I was weak and selfish. I'm sorry. That's all I wanted to say. I'm truly deeply sorry." The room fell silent. I watched Dad process the apology, saw the emotions crossing his face, anger, sadness, and finally, something like peace. "I forgive you, Howard," Dad said quietly. The words seemed to shock Howard. "What?" "I forgive you," Dad repeated. "Not because what you did was okay, and not because it doesn't still hurt, but because holding on to anger only poisons me, not you. You'll serve your time. You'll live with what you did. That's justice. I don't need to carry hatred on top of that." Howard broke down completely, sobbing into his hands. A guard stepped forward, concerned, but Dad waved him back. We sat there for several minutes while Howard composed himself. When he finally looked up, his face was different somehow, lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but thank you." As we left the prison, I asked Dad, "How could you forgive him so easily?" "It wasn't easy," Dad admitted. "But I learned something through this whole experience. Forgiveness isn't about the other person, it's about freeing yourself. Howard will always carry what he did. I don't have to carry it too." That visit marked another turning point. Dad wrote an article for a business journal about forgiveness in the corporate world, about how holding grudges affects workplace culture and personal well-being. The article went viral, with thousands of people sharing stories about forgiving colleagues who'd wronged them or seeking forgiveness for their own mistakes. Several companies reached out asking Dad to develop training programs about ethics and accountability. He started a consulting business on the side, helping organizations create cultures where people could admit mistakes without fear and where integrity was genuinely rewarded. Uncle Preston became one of Dad's first consulting clients, hiring him to help reform the culture at his remaining dealership. I built my business on aggressive sales tactics and cutthroat competition, Uncle Preston admitted during a family dinner. Your father showed me there's a better way. That you can be successful without crushing people. The changes at Uncle Preston's dealership were remarkable. Employee satisfaction increased. Customer reviews improved. And surprisingly, profits went up too. On the 3rd anniversary of Dad's vindication, Westbridge Industries held a special ceremony. They were establishing the Harrison Integrity Award, an annual recognition for employees who demonstrated exceptional ethical behavior, especially in difficult circumstances. Dad was visibly emotional as the CEO announced the award. 3 years ago, we made a terrible mistake, the CEO told the assembled employees. We doubted one of our best people based on false evidence. Harrison could have sued us, could have destroyed our reputation in the media, could have walked away and never looked back. Instead, he came back and made us better. This award ensures we never forget the lessons his experience taught us. The first recipient of the Harrison Integrity Award was Patricia from accounting, who'd spoken up about Howard Pierce's suspicious behavior even when it wasn't popular to do so. She'd risked her own career to support the investigation that cleared Dad's name. As Patricia accepted her award, she thanked Dad publicly. You showed me that doing the right thing matters more than keeping your head down. Thank you for that example. That evening, our entire family gathered for a celebration dinner. Mom, Dad, me, Uncle Preston, Aunt Claire, my cousins, and Grandma. Even some of Dad's closest colleagues from Westridge joined us. Grandma stood up to make a toast, her hands shaking slightly with age but her voice strong. I'm so proud of my boys, she said, looking at Dad and Uncle Preston. One learned to stand firm in the truth no matter what, and the other learned to admit when he was wrong. Both of those things take courage. She turned to me. And I'm proud of my grandson, who showed us that loyalty and love mean fighting for people when they can't fight for themselves. You reminded us all what family really means. As everyone raised their glasses, I looked around the table and realized how much had changed. We'd been through crisis and come out stronger. We'd been torn apart and found our way back together. We'd faced the worst in people and discovered the best in ourselves. Uncle Preston stood next, his turn to speak. 3 years ago, I said some terrible things in this very room. I called my brother a thief and a failure. I mocked him when he was at his lowest. I wish I could take those words back, Uncle Preston continued, his voice thick with emotion. But I can't. All I can do is be better going forward. My brother taught me that success isn't measured in cars or houses or bank accounts. It's measured in character, in how you treat people, in whether you can look at yourself in the mirror with pride. He raised his glass toward Dad. You're the success story, brother. You always were. I was just too blind to see it. Dad stood and hugged Uncle Preston, and there wasn't a dry eye at the table. As the celebration continued, I stepped outside for a moment of fresh air. Dad joined me on the porch. Thinking about everything that happened? He asked. I nodded. It's strange how something so terrible led to so many good things. You're happier now than before. Uncle Preston became a better person. I found my career path. Our family grew closer. Dad put his arm around my shoulders. That's the thing about crisis. It doesn't create character, it reveals it. And it gives us a choice about who we want to become. Who do you want to become? I asked. Dad smiled. I think I'm already becoming it. Someone who stands for truth, who forgives without forgetting, who uses his experiences to help others. That's enough for me. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Inside, our family laughed and celebrated, the sound of healing and hope. The journey from humiliation to vindication had been long and painful, but it had led us here, to a place of genuine peace, stronger relationships, and a future built on truth. And that, I realized, was the real victory. Not the job restored or the money recovered or even the apology received. The real victory was becoming people we could be proud of. individually and together. As we headed back inside to rejoin the celebration, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, our family could face them. We'd been tested in fire and emerged as gold. And nothing, not false accusations, not family betrayal, not public humiliation, could take that away from us. The truth had set us free, and we would never take that freedom for granted again.